Breaking tonight. Britain has been rocked tonight by a seismic confrontation no one ever imagined seeing in their lifetime. The SAS are the very unit politicians brag about, salute and rely on to do the nation's darkest, most dangerous work, has turned its sights on the government itself. And they're not whispering. They're not hinting. They are preparing to sue the state. This isn't a policy disagreement. This isn't a press statement. This is a legal warning shot fired by Britain's most elite fighting force. The spark came in total silence. A single document delivered by the SAS Regimental Association's lawyers to Northern Ireland Secretary Hilary Benn. A formal letter before action. In military terms, the calm before an explosion. At the heart of this historic confrontation is Keir Starmer's new legacy bill, a piece of legislation sold to the public as fairness, justice and accountability. But for the men who were sent into Belfast back alleys, border ambushes and terrorist strongholds during the Troubles, this bill is nothing short of a betrayal. For decades, SAS operators carried out missions the government later refused to even acknowledge. They fought in shadows, kept secrets that will never be told, and came home not to applause but to silence. Now many are in their 60s and 70, and what they're being offered isn't gratitude. It's reinvestigation, re-questioning, re-litigation, events they were cleared of decades ago, operations examined by courts, inquests, intelligence committees, now reopened as if history itself is on trial. And this time the soldiers say they're done staying quiet. Fix the bill or face us in court. That's the message. A message so loud it has shaken Westminster to its core. Because if the SAS is willing to challenge the Crown, then something inside the system has fractured beyond repair. Britain is witnessing not just a political crisis, but a crisis of trust between the country's most disciplined warriors and the government they once defended with unquestionable loyalty. And this is only the beginning. What pushed the SAS, the most tight-lipped, disciplined, unseen force in British history, to the brink of declaring legal war on their own government? It all comes down to Starmer's new legacy bill, a piece of legislation that looks polished and harmless on paper, but underneath, veterans say it's a loaded weapon pointed straight at them. For years, the previous system, and flawed as it was, at least offered limited immunity to those who testified honestly about their actions during the Troubles. It wasn't perfect, but it recognised a simple truth. You cannot ask young soldiers to fight terrorists in chaos and then drag them into courtrooms forever. Starmer's plan tears that protection apart. Under the new proposal, a legacy commission will reopen old cases, re-examine incidents already investigated, and judge in hindsight whether immunity should be granted or denied. Lawyers call the bill manifestly deficient. Soldiers call it something far simpler, a betrayal. Imagine being 22, ordered into a suspected IRA safe house, knowing one wrong move ends with a bomb on a high street the next morning. You follow orders, you act fast, you survive. Now imagine being 72 and receiving a letter saying the event is being reopened again. New questions, new statements, new investigators who weren't even alive when the firefight happened. That's the nightmare hundreds of SAS and Army veterans say they're facing. And then came the bombshell that really ignited fury inside the regiment. Recent inquests, particularly the high-profile 2025 ruling, claimed SAS operators used unjustified lethal force in a 1992 ambush. A ruling made over 30 years after the fact, with witnesses dead, memories faded and IRA commanders long gone. Suddenly campaigners had oxygen. Suddenly every old case became unfinished business. Veterans watched as the narrative shifted from "they protected us" to "they must be re-examined." For them, the legacy bill wasn't a path to truth. It was a path back into hell. Within military circles, the reaction was immediate and volcanic. Generals privately warned ministers that morale could collapse. Intelligence allies, particularly the United States, began asking whether joint operations could be compromised if British soldiers could later be prosecuted for missions approved by both nations. This isn't just legislation. This is geopolitics. This is national credibility. And at the centre of it all stands Keir Starmer, defending a bill that has now pushed the SAS into open confrontation with the state. The moment the SAS Regimental Association delivered its letter before action, Westminster felt the temperature drop. Not because it was aggressive. It wasn't. Not because it threatened violence. It didn't. But because the SAS never speaks. Ever. For Britain's most secretive regiment, silence is doctrine. Silence is discipline. Silence is identity. So when they break that silence, it means something catastrophic has happened. The letter sent directly to Northern Ireland Secretary Hilary Benn wasn't a plea. It was a warning. Fix the bill or face us in court. Legal action from the SS against the Crown. For the first time in British history, inside Whitehall, officials scrambled. They knew what this represented. You can ignore protesters, spin journalists, brush aside backbench MPs, but you cannot ignore the SAS telling the government it has failed them. Behind the scenes, sources say the PM's office went into containment mode. Meetings were called, advisors argued. Some insisted the SAS were overreacting. Others warned that if Starmer mishandled this, it could trigger a full-scale military revolt, not in the streets, but in the courts, in the press, and in public opinion. Defence chiefs were furious, not at the SAS, but at the political blindness that let things reach this point. One general reportedly asked, how did we get to a place where the men who broke the IRA are preparing legal battle plans against their own government? Meanwhile, veterans watched closely. For them, this wasn't just about legal risk, it was about honour. For decades, they operated in the shadows, under impossible conditions, making decisions in seconds that politicians have debated for years, and now they feel abandoned by the very state they protected. Then came the international tremors. Senior American officials quietly contacted the Ministry of Defence, expressing concern that prosecutions against British soldiers could undermine joint operations. If your government won't protect your own operators, one diplomat allegedly said, how do we guarantee our own won't be exposed next? That hit London like a shockwave. Then this wasn't just a domestic dispute anymore. It was a threat to Britain's strategic alliances. And all the while, public sentiment began to shift. Army towns, veterans' families, conservative commentators, even apolitical citizens started rallying behind the SAS. They saw this not as a technical legal issue, but as a moral one, a question of whether Britain still stands by those who stood by her. The letter before action wasn't simply a document, it was a declaration. If you push us, we will fight. This time in your arena, not ours. By the time the SAS's legal threat hit the headlines, Britain was already trembling with unease. But this unfolding storm is where the entire country, from Parliament to pubs to military bases, erupted into open conflict over what this government has done. The legacy bill, once sold as a balanced path to truth, is now recognised as something far darker. Critics say it reopens wounds, revives decades-old trauma, and risks turning ageing veterans into political scapegoats. Supporters insist it gives long-denied justice to families who lost loved ones during the Troubles and caught in the crossfire. The soldiers who carried the weight of Britain's security on their shoulders. Veterans argue one thing with absolute clarity: they did their jobs. They protected a nation suffocating under bomb threats, guerrilla ambushes and unpredictable urban warfare. To drag them back into interrogation rooms now feels to many like a betrayal disguised as legal reform. Inside Parliament, the fractures widened. Labour MPs are privately terrified. Army towns are part of their electoral backbone, and they know veterans don't forget, don't forgive, and don't stay silent when they're pushed too far. Opposition parties sense blood in the water. They call the bill a slow-motion collapse of trust between Britain and its bravest. Meanwhile, TV studios turned into battlegrounds. Human rights lawyers demanded accountability. Retired colonels slammed the bill as an ideological experiment with real human collateral. Every interview, every debate, every viral clip fueled the sense that this wasn't just legislation. It was a national identity crisis. Beyond the studios, the public mood tilted sharply. Church groups, veterans' charities, community organisations all began to question whether reopening decades-old cases actually heals wounds or simply tears open new ones. On social media, anger built like a drumbeat. Hashtags about betrayal, honour and justice trended for days. Then there were the international murmurs. America's concerns deepened. NATO partners whispered uneasily about the precedent. If British soldiers aren't safe from retroactive scrutiny, one European official warned, who is? Britain suddenly looked uncertain, divided, and dangerously self-destructive. The government doubled down. Ministers repeated phrases about truth, balance, and reconciliation, but it landed like a damp script. Veterans groups accused them of hiding behind buzzwords instead of confronting the real issue, whether soldiers deserve finality or indefinite legal jeopardy. As tensions escalated, one phrase from a retired officer captured the mood. We fought terrorists for Britain, now we fight bureaucracy for survival. And with the SAS preparing to escalate their legal war, the crisis was no longer theoretical. It was happening. It was personal. It was historic. By the time the storm reached its fifth act, Britain was standing at a crossroads, one shaped not by politicians or pundits, but by the very men who once held back the tide of violence in the darkest era of modern history. And now those same men were preparing to drag the government into court, not out of vengeance, but out of sheer necessity. The SAS's stance had become more than a legal threat. It had become a national reckoning. Veterans who had stayed silent for decades were suddenly speaking out. Retired generals gave interviews they would once have avoided. Army families, often overlooked in political debate, demanded answers with a clarity that ministers could no longer dodge. Everywhere, one question echoed. If the government can betray the SAS, what hope is there for anyone else in uniform? Recruitment experts warned the crisis was poisoning morale. Young people were asking whether service still meant sacrifice, or whether it now meant future prosecution. Senior officers privately admitted that trust in government had fallen to its lowest point in decades. Even those still loyal to Starmer's leadership whispered that the Prime Minister had misjudged the psychology of the armed forces on a catastrophic scale. Meanwhile, the Legacy Commission, the body meant to deliver truth and closure, became a symbol of everything veterans feared. It had the power to reopen any Troubles-era case, no matter how old, no matter how many times it had already been settled. Hundreds of soldiers could be questioned again. Some could face new charges, and all of it under the banner of justice. For families who lost loved ones, this was about their right to answers. But for soldiers who acted in moments of terror, this felt like a retroactive rewriting of war. Two sides, both wounded, both demanding justice, now being pitted against each other by a government that promised unity but delivered division. As international pressure mounted, the stakes became global. The United States, Britain's closest military ally, warned that endless legal exposure could erode joint operations and intelligence sharing. We need certainty, one official said, not a system that punishes yesterday's battles tomorrow. Inside Number 10, panic simmered beneath the surface. Advisors debated concessions, lawyers warned of explosive consequences, ministers insisted the bill must stand. No one could agree on anything except that the SAS's case would dominate politics for months, maybe years. And yet beneath all the politics, there was something deeply human happening. Veterans spoke openly about exhaustion, not anger, not rage, exhaustion. They weren't demanding medals or applause. They were demanding closure, the simple dignity of knowing that their past would not be rediscovered and repurposed by every new government looking for moral theatre. The SAS Regimental Association made its final message clear. Change the bill, or we'll see you in court. A sentence that has never existed in British history until now. This crisis is no longer just a debate. It's a test of who we are as a nation. A test of memory, loyalty and moral courage. And the question lingers like smoke over Westminster. Do we stand by those who defended us, or abandon them when politics demands a new narrative? The answer will shape Britain's future far more than any headline, any speech or any bill ever could. If you're loving these breakdowns, hit that subscribe button, smash the like and drop a comment telling me your thoughts about it.